But what did you think was the problem while you were Minister of State? Why are they not patronized? The professionals.
No, I'm not saying they're not adequately patronized. You see, governments always look out to foreign professionals because I don't know whether it's a mentality we develop over time, but which we need to shed and to patronize local capacities.
Do you think it's also something that the local people are not doing as well? Do you think they're not asserting themselves enough, or have they also failed over time?
Yes, I think we need to grow up also. We need to grow up in our capacity. We need to grow up in our knowledge base, and our sizes also. Most of the local players are small in sizes. Outside, abroad now, we find the companies, huge companies, are emerging as service providers in the engineering and other fields. So I think to be able to cope with the global, play, we probably have to also realign, our methods here to meet up to the challenge.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm very interested in this talk of PPPs. I mean, especially considering just about 2 nights ago, our correspondent in London, Doris, sent a report about how Londoners had hit the streets in protest as to rising cost of energy in terms of fuel, petrol that they consume, and also electricity as well. And we know that in those areas, those things have been fully privatized. And yet, how many years down the line, it would seem that the cost of these things keep rising, so much so that it's beginning to create an uproar. Now, coming back to our climb, we're just beginning to enter this public-private partnership, in some cases outright privatization, and there is a concern that at some point we might get there. What do you think that government can do to assure people or reassure its citizens that maybe that's just an isolated case, we will handle things differently?
There are a number of countries in the world, and probably the case of London is one. If there are 10 cases or there are 100 cases and there's no protest, one protest will not deter. You see, the problem is government cannot provide all these infrastructure services. It's not possible. There is a limitation in government funding. Government has two sources. Either it's a current account or debt. Now, from these two sources, there's no way we can raise that kind of capacity to provide this infrastructure. So there's a need for the private sector to come. And there's a body the government has set up, the ICRC, the Infrastructure Concessioning Regulatory Commission, which is supposed to be there to watch over certain things, including the pricing, to ensure that you don't go within certain benchmark. And I think that the important thing, first of all, is to have the utility, and then now to be able to regulate it and be sensitive to the environment. Otherwise, we don't have it at all. For how many years? When I was a minister, we were aspiring to get to 4,000 megawatts. We are still aspiring to get 4,000 megawatts, and I left about 12 years ago. So the point is 4,000 megawatts is not even adequate for Lagos. That's the truth. The city of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia consumes about 6,000 megawatts, just one city. So if we dedicate all the 4,000 megawatts to Lagos,
I think it's more of a question of processes in terms of what can government really do to reassure, to calm nerves. Anytime, what happens anytime PPP comes up, immediately it would seem that people are daggers drawn.
You see, we're always stuck, in our comfort zones. If you look at the case of telecom, before you had to know the territorial manager and so on to ensure that your phone works throughout the month, and so many other things like politics and so on come in. Today, do you really have to see anybody or know about anybody working? And you see, the private sector play also brings, apart from efficiency, a discipline in usage. People know that they have to pay for these things, so they minimize wastage. And so I think the first thing is to provide the service. Then the next step is to buy into the culture of use of it. And the next thing to talk about managing the prices. Of course, I mean, once there is competition, the prices will continue to be lowered. And so if power today is privatized at the three levels, the generation, the transmission, and the distribution. Transmission has its own challenge, but the two mainly, generation and distribution. You find that now you will have at least people will generate and know that they will be off-taken, and then the distributors also will now look at the weaknesses in the infrastructure at the local level and strengthen them. And then also now with the aim of making money. There's so much wastage in our cities. At the time I was the minister, I know that over 30% of the power generated is wasted, either technically or commercially. So the private sector will not allow that to happen.
Do you think we need to legislate governments providing the backbone for private sector to thrive? Because some say, look, in some other cases, the private sector won't just stand on its own.
You see, yes, there is a need for legislation, but there's also the need for political will. People that aspire to lead a country should be patriotic and know that they should strengthen capacity within. Now, if that happens, you don't need much legislation. There are so many legislations that are on the ground already that are not actually efficiently implemented. So I think it's about the culture, it's about the perception more than the legislation.
In fact, some also suggesting sincerity, which Mapa talked about. They think in some cases where the private sector is supposed to compete in a certain industry, you have a federal government agency also competing in that same industry. So that federal government agency gets a lot of funding, far much more than that private sector company. And that private sector company is put at a disadvantage because they have to compete in the same industry. So these are part of the challenges of political will.
In some cases, you can work. In some cases, look at the media. There's NTA, there's Channel, there's AIT, and so on. As far as I'm concerned, even if government is overfunding NTA, channels, AIT, and so on, are doing well, at least.
But they could do better if there was a level playing field.
Even they can do better if NTA is privatized.
No, if
or government lets off.
Is that government? It's the people's station, isn't it?
No, the point I'm making is that, look, for as long as there is a termination from the private players, they can compete.
How and very soon without support?
Very soon government will. Okay, support is a different thing. I mean, not just. Look
at engineering and construction, for instance.
Yes.
They need help. But some say in other countries, even in Asian countries, the Asian countries tell them, okay, what is it that you want to do? They give a certain quota to young school leavers to enable them get that experience so that they can go and then develop.
No, I think we're talking about two different things. I mean, we're talking about support from government or support for the companies.
Support from government for the PPP to be strong and move.
That's why the RCRC is there.
Can RCRC, are they meeting up to any of this challenge?
Well, they are just, they are still young.
Because people don't even know what the RCRC is.
You're right. They are still young, but they're probably trying. I think, I don't want to get into politics, but there is a need for strong political will to push the PPP itself. I have my own reservations, not of the PPP, but our preparedness for the PPP.
Why? What is the reservation?
There was an article in The Economist, I can't remember the author, who said that in a country where you have on your property written, this property is not for sale, says much about security of investments. You know, so in a situation where the security of investments is still questionable, the legal regime, you know, to handle disputes is still weak. You know, you have challenges, but at the end of the day, I think we'll make it. First of all, there's a good intention from government. Setting up the CRC is one. Two, they have started. Government has started in some ways, like in the telecom sector. In the power sector, they're struggling to do that. Quite a number of sectors, we know. I think at the end of the day, if we all buy into it, it could work.
Sometimes, you know, one of the things you mentioned is that the government should be lighter, and you know, it looks like it's very heavy, even at the state levels,
yes.
And that they should shed a lot more. And sometimes that is a sentiment that a lot of people share in terms of when government says, well, now you'll have to pay for this service. They're thinking government is wasting so much money, even maintaining itself. It doesn't look like it's shedding anything, and then it wants us to pay.
The Minister of Finance said we're going to lower our current expenditure from 75 to 73 or so, as a proportion of the budget. You can see the point. They're so huge a state that is consuming most of what it should go for services or supporting services. So along that line, I think the
government is not doing very well.
Government should be smaller in size and more efficient, more effective.
All right, I have to thank you for coming on. Malam Murtala Aliyu is the Deputy President, Nigerian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, and a former Minister of State for Power and Steel. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you.
All right, then we'll return after this break. Okay, we'll take a break. Join us again.